I keep hearing all of these numbers thrown around like there's some universal truth. When you get this wrong, forecasting feels really unreliable. As a leadership team, you don't look very good. And when targets are missed, nobody can really pinpoint why. And all of a sudden, we have to now increase our odds of closing deals from 20% to 50%. I hate to say this, but not all pipeline is real. Now I'm going to show you the type of formula that you can be using so that you can accurately build pipeline coverage that makes sense for your business. Promise to give you a clear understanding of how you can think about healthy pipeline coverage inside your organization. How much pipeline coverage do I actually need? This is a fun one. Because what is a healthy amount of pipeline coverage? Who knows? Well, in this video, we're actually going to find out. I keep hearing all of these numbers thrown around like there's some universal truth. You need 3x pipeline, 4x. I've heard 9x pipeline. The thing is, there isn't just a universal truth to this. And we're going to find out why. And then we're going to talk about what we should be actually focusing on to understand what a healthy pipeline coverage is for our organization. You know what's crazy? I've actually been in consulting engagements, and I've been in the weekly leadership meeting, and you've got like 5, 6, 7, 8 leaders on the call. And then one leader pops up and says, well, Hannah, how much pipeline coverage do you recommend that we need? And I'm like, awkward. I'm like, it depends. And you're going to find out why, exactly why in this video. And it's so important to get this right for your business, because when you get this wrong, forecasting feels really unreliable. As a leadership team, you don't look very good. And when targets are missed, nobody can really pinpoint why. So in this video, I'm going to break down 3 things. Ow, that hurt. What pipeline coverage actually is, the formula that people typically use and why that formula is actually incomplete. And then I'm going to show you the type of formula that you can be using so that you can accurately build pipeline coverage that makes sense for your business. Sound good? All right, well, let's dive in. Actually, before we get started, I want you to go and open your CRM or your spreadsheet, and I want you to really ask yourself something. Do we really have 5x or 3x pipeline coverage, or are we just hoping that we have? For those of you who are joining me for the first time, my name is Hannah Ajikawa. I am the CEO and founder of Revenue Funnel, and we are a go-to-market consulting firm that works with B2B organizations, helping them to identify and fix the structural issues that often block growth, such as pipeline coverage. And I've been in B2B go-to-market teams since we used to send out technology on CDs, a really, really long time. And I like to talk about things on this channel that are really important, but rarely taught or understood. All right, now we can dive in. So what is pipeline coverage? So we're gonna use purple because I'm feeling purpley. Okay, so pipeline coverage is the number of live opportunities. Can we call it opties? Is that okay? Well, the value of those relative, so in comparison to the target or quota. That's it. It's not as hard as we think. So let's just look at a basic formula for pipeline coverage. So what we have is to get one deal, we are going to divide that by the win rate. Let's just do so one deal. We need to divide that by the win rate. So let's assume that for every one deal, we win 20% of the time. Win rate is 20% or 0.2, which means if we divide that, we actually need pipeline coverage of 5x, okay? So one deal, we need 5 of them in order to close one. That's 20%. Also, we think. But this is just a basic formula just so you can understand exactly what this means. So putting it into pounds and pence, dollars and cents, we need to get 1 million in revenue this year. So we need 5 times that in order to increase our chances of actually doing that, which means we actually need 5 million in revenue. Now, I said also we think because this is where most people stop. They stop with this basic formula. But what I call this is the headline coverage, because there are actually quite a few more things that we need to consider in order to make sure that we can answer the question, how much pipeline coverage do I need, or how much pipeline coverage is healthy for my business? So let's take this a layer deeper, because this is where you're going to look impressive to senior leadership, investors, and the board. So what we want to try and understand is the next layer deeper. So we've got what the pipeline coverage is theoretically, but what we want to do is make sure that we're looking at the closable window pipeline, AKA effective pipeline. I'm just going to call it pipe. okay? So we're trying to get effective pipe. But if you think about it, pipeline only matters if you can actually close it in time. So if we're thinking about the 1 million target that we have, and we're saying we need 5 million in pipeline coverage, so 5 times the amount that we need to close in order to increase our chances of hitting our target. What if we create 4 million in pipeline in the last week of the year? Does that mean that we've got enough pipeline to close? Probably not. And that's why it's really important that we distinguish between pipeline coverage, which is the headline coverage, and pipeline coverage, which is actually closable, which we're going to call the effective pipeline coverage, or closable pipeline, whatever you want to call it. But I like effective and also headline. And this is where we need to think about our sales cycle length. So if you go through my videos on YouTube, you'll see that I made a video on sales cycle, how to speed up the sales cycle. Okay, so let's talk about this. So now we have our total pipeline coverage. We've got 5 million, right? We've got 5 million in pipeline coverage because it's 20%. But now we discover our sales cycle length. And now we're looking at, how doesn't that now affect the pipeline, the headline pipeline that we actually have in our organization? Because this is going to make it go from headline to effective. And our goal is to figure out what is the effective pipeline that we need in order to increase our chances of making sure that we hit our quota this year. So let's assume that we've got a 4-month sales cycle, okay? So our sales cycle is 4 months. Anything created, let's just put 4-month sales cycle. Anything created in Q4, for example, is highly unlikely to close inside that year. Meaning, rather than us having a £5 million or $5 million pipeline coverage, we now only have 2 million. And all of a sudden, we have to now increase our odds of closing deals from 20% to 50%. And that's very highly unlikely to happen in normal circumstances, all right? So remember, coverage and pipeline coverage is not a year number. I mean, theoretically on paper, we have our headline coverage. If we want to do 10 million next year, we need to have 5x that, whatever it is. But what we're really trying to ask ourselves is, what is the amount of pipeline that we always need to be able to close the X number of revenue that we need inside a given period? That's the question that we need to ask ourselves and the answer that we need to seek out. So I like to sit with clients and say, do you have enough in-window pipeline to ensure that you are going to close the amount of revenue required this year? So our pipeline coverage requirement now goes, let's get serious now. Let's get red. So pipeline coverage. Okay, so our pipeline coverage now becomes a discussion about rolling numbers. We're talking about a rolling window. And what's great is if you do have a CRM or you're fancy on Excel or Google Sheet, you can create this so that you have something that is more accurate. And we're trying to define 2 specific numbers inside the organization. One is the headline pipe. We want to know what that number is in general. So as we said, we need to close 1 million in business, which means headline pipe equals X. And then what we need is the in-window or the effective pipe, which is inside a closable window based on our sales cycle. How much pipeline do we need to make sure that all of that revenue comes in this particular year, in this particular month, quarter, week, whatever it is, depending on your sales cycle. When we go into our CRM or our tracking sheet, here's what we're looking at for effective pipeline. We want it to be a proper op. So let's go here. So it needs to be a proper opportunity. Okay, so properly qualified opportunity. It needs to be in window. It needs to be active. Active means it's actually moving. When we look at the activities that are being tracked against that opportunity, is it actively moving? Or do we see massive gaps in stalled conversations where we're like, So you need to decide inside your organization, what do we consider to be something that is stalled, but still labeled as active, and what is actually real active? I know there's a lot of layers to this, but if you're trying to get your forecasting accurate and you really want to know how you're performing and have the clearest leading indicator for that, then you need to do the work. Okay, so actively moving. And the last thing is it needs to be something that you can definitely sell. So definitely, why did I make myself spell this? Definitely sell. Okay, so is this an opportunity that is workable by the team? I know that we all have very ambitious roadmaps, right? But right now we're trying to get a clear and accurate number. So we're not going to say this deal would definitely be something that's workable by the team. If we just develop this extra functionality and widget inside the platform, then they will definitely buy. The likelihood of that, low. So let's keep it real, okay? So effective pipeline, we want to have a proper opportunity. We want something that's in window, it's actively moving. So this is proper opportunity, is properly qualified. And also it's something that is workable by your team, so you can definitely sell it. So most companies think they have 5x pipeline. They see a lot of revenue numbers and things inside their database. And then when you start to do things like assess the quality, look at the in window, so the sales cycle, you start to understand if it's active, then what you realize is this no longer looks as good as you hoped it would. However, it does mean that you now have the data and the insights and you can now make a plan. So what you see is this 5 million headline pipe that you have very quickly turns into 2 million, which is going to be 2x that number. And now you might feel a bit jittery, but the thing is, it's okay if you actually know that this is the case and you have mechanisms in place that's going to still allow you to hit your quota. The difference is when you don't know and you are hoping and praying that that rolling 5 million is actually something that's rolling, but it's not. So when you look at the quality, when you look at in window, when you look at active, you're going to find out, and you strip things out, you realize that it's a bit lower. Okay, so what do we now do about this and how do we start to think about this? Well, we need to look at these 3 areas in order to figure out how do we add a bit more control and actually assess the buying reality for our prospects who we want to buy from us inside the right time frame so that we can hit our targets. So first things first, let's look at the slippage factor. It just means that deals slip, okay? It's just the reality of sales. No matter how much you want to control it, deals slip. And sometimes even when we think we are sure, stuff happens at the last minute. I remember working in a team and one of my colleagues' deals slipped on the day it was supposed to be signed because the person ended up getting knocked over in the hospital. So what do? Okay, so when we talk about deal slipping, think about this, okay? So the buying committee could change. Now what? Procurement could drag, procurement or the team, maybe finance if it's not a large organization that's responsible for approving things. And there could be just a change in budget, just a budget freeze overnight. You're like, what the heck? So these things are things that are out of our control, but if we factor them in, guess what they become? Controllables. So the first one is deal slippage. The next one is our sales cycle, okay? Understanding our sales cycle, really looking at the data and thinking, how long does it really take for people to buy from us from the moment that we open up an opportunity? And this is why it's so important that we actually have a clear definition of what an opportunity is inside the organization. Because people just be opening and closing at different times, it really messes up all of your downstream metrics, okay? So that's another video. But for now, the sales cycle length. So we need this so that we can get a clear in-window time frame. If we think that it takes us 6 months to close something and it's actually 8, or it takes us 4 weeks to close something and it's actually 2, it messes everything up. And it rolls back up to us not really understanding how much money do we actually make at any given time. And because of that, how much pipeline do we need to make sure that we make that money? So when we look at those 2 things, slippage and we look at sales cycle, there's different kind of, I guess, high level numbers or brackets that you can think through. So with regards to slippage, which means it's slipping outside of the in window, there's a couple of things to think about. So I would say for mid-market, an SME organization, you'll probably see slippage of about 10 to 20%. It's usually to some degree, and again, it's just a bit like finger in the air, lower risk purchases. So someone says that they're likely to close in a given window, it's highly likely to happen. It's highly probable that it's going to happen. But with enterprise, bigger deal values, more complex sales environments, I'd say we're looking at higher risk, so probably about 20 to 40%. This is where you see huge committee changes, huge changes in the people involved. So senior leadership shifts right at the top. $1 billion company brings in a new CEO, don't think you're going to get that deal through. Okay, big procurement challenges, everything changes. New system, we're about to roll out SAP. Good luck trying to get that deal over the line. Budget changes, guess what? We ain't spending anymore. We've taken a new strategic direction. Okay, so we see a lot of that happening, slippage in the sales cycle being a bit warped, hence why it's so important to track it so we can get averages. Okay, now the last thing is it still red? quality. Now, I hate to say this, but not all pipeline is real. I mean, I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but a lot of pipeline is not real. And sometimes we create environments inside our organization that makes reps force things through. And they're hoping that nobody sees or nobody asks too many questions, because guess what? The leader keeps canceling their one-to-one, so they don't have to say to the leader, this deal isn't real. Same with customer success. This customer is definitely gonna churn, but I'm just not gonna tell you yet because it's gonna impact the way that you structure my compensation. So what do we want? Visibility. When we want it? Now. Sounds a bit like I don't know, I get carried away here. So we wanna make sure that we factor in something that we can't always control because we don't know everything. Sometimes prospects lie. I've had prospects that just straight up lie. So we want to factor in the fact that some deals are low quality, and the way that we address the low quality is the things that we can control with good old qualification. Again, that's another video. So what we can assume is that if we look at all of our pipeline, we can assume that about 80% is of a good quality, which means there's a high probability that that organization is going to exchange money with you for the goods and services that you provide. Sale, closed one. So now that we understand slippage and that kind of in-window part and the quality, we need to readjust our pipeline coverage effective number. And this is why when someone says you just need 4x pipeline coverage, it's like, no, we don't. Which window are you talking about? Pipeline coverage for the quarter, or for the year, or for the week, or for the month? It flexes and it varies per organization. So now that we have slippage of about 10 to 20%, we think the quality is about 80%. And we've also looked at our CRM or our dashboard or our database so we can see what the sales cycle length is. Let's create our effective pipeline coverage number. And we are going to use green and orange because it's bright and good. So I want to first let's just go back to the headline coverage, just so we can have a comparison. So in the beginning, we said our headline pipe coverage is 5x. Boom, done. We go to the board, we go to our leadership meeting, we go to our team meeting, and we say, look at the dashboard. We are at 4x pipeline coverage. We just need one more X so that we can make sure that we do that because we have a 20% win rate. Now, we've done a good job because we've watched these videos, we've read some books, and we followed some thought leaders, and now we understand that ain't it. We actually need to get an effective pipeline coverage number. Effective pipe coverage. So what we now have is for every one deal, we are dividing by the win rate. Let's just do one deal. Let's just do that. We're timesing, by the quality. So let's just do divided. Sorry guys, divided by the quality. I made a mistake, so we're just gonna cross this out. Let's start again. All right, so what we wanna do is look at a couple of sides to an equation. I'm not great at maths, okay? So I don't want you to judge me. First things first, we've had a basic qualification up here, right? We basically said that for every one deal, we win at 20%, and that equals 5x coverage is what's required. For effective pipeline coverage, we need to look at this in a different way. So we're saying for every one deal, so 1 times our win rate, which is, let's just say it was 20%. We also want to look at, so we've got win rate, we've got slippage, which we said about 20% slip, depending on the size of the organization. And then what we want to do is divide it by the quality, which we said is about 80%. So this is plus, it's about 80%, right? I've done it as a decimal and a percentage, so forgive me. Now the equation looks a little bit different. So let's say the win rate equals 20% or 1 in 5. So let's just do 5x. Slippage, so we need 20% on top, okay? So if we know that out of 1 is a whole number, 1 deal, 20% of those slip into the next pipeline coverage window, then we need to get 20% on top, right? So slippage now equals times 1.2, and then quality is, you got to divide it by, the quality. So we got 0.8, so only 80%. What we now have is a very different number. We have 5 times 1.2 divided by 0.8 equals 7.5x. And you know I had to look at my notes for that because I ain't trying to remember all of that in my head. Our effective pipeline coverage isn't 5x at all. It's actually 7.5x. You may not need 7.5x at all given times. It's going to change depending on how much revenue you've brought in, what your stretch target is, what your budget is, what you need to bring in with your bookings versus what you need to bring in overall revenue. Like, it's going to change, but you need to understand the context of your organization and make sure that inside conversations with your leadership, you're talking about our headline pipeline coverage and our effective pipeline coverage. And then what we want to do is, because we can track our effective pipeline coverage over time, once you have a couple of periods or cohorts of data, then you can improve your headline pipeline coverage. Because what you want to do is go into a year knowing on average, our headline pipeline coverage is always going to have to be this amount. So we always want to see this volume at any given time inside our CRM system, inside our dashboard, okay? So 7.5x is very different to 5x. So what we know now with this is, if you have slippage issues, which are likely, if you have quality issues, then you know that you have factored this in, and that 5x is not going to be protective coverage for you. 7x is going to be protective coverage. And that's what we need to focus on building. Now, there's more to this story, because the final check that we have to do, if I do have any paper left, actually, let's use the bottom. Let's maximize the paper because we need to save the environment. All right. We need to sanity check our unit economics, because when we go out and we come out of our leadership meeting and we're like, oh my gosh, we need more pipeline. More pipeline is not always free. There's actually a couple of things that we need to think about, because the cost will be directly an implication of trying to drive more pipeline into the organization, okay? So let's just look at these and how we can think through them step by step so that you have everything you need to figure out this pipeline coverage challenge. Okay, so what we need to look at is the cost per qualified opportunity, not cost per lead. In order to get an opportunity, you might have additional sales and marketing costs that you could define as direct costs specifically for this opportunity. Now, you could have additional campaign activity that happens from marketing. You might have workshops that you run through sales, which means more time. You actually have salespeople's actual time. And this is why it's so important to track stuff like this. How much time is being spent specifically on existing deals? And you can average this out, but you'll start to get a little bit of a number that you can work with. Now, remember, this is going to be important, because if you are saying we actually need more opportunities, then the cost of those opportunities we have to monitor, because the cost of opportunity might go up or down. We don't know, but it's something that we have to focus on. Next, we need to look at our CAC and payback. So that's looking at our customer acquisition cost, and then payback is how long it actually takes for us to get that money back into the organization. If we need to get more opportunities, which means we need to get more leads first, then it may mean that part of that has a direct cost associated with it. So we're going to have to track how much is our CAC increasing in this given period, and does it still drive the, is it still making sense for us to go down this road? Because think about it, there are different levers that you can use. Again, this is another video, but there's different levers that you can use to drive opportunities. You could just drive up the value rather than the volume. You could drive up the volume rather than the value. You can go faster, slower. So there's a lot of things that we can use. I call it the 4 V's of go-to-market effectiveness or go-to-market control, all right? So how much is it costing us? And then when do we get our money back? The other thing we want to look at, let's go here, is LTV and margin. This is a lifetime value. So we're looking at the average time that a customer stays with you and how much they spend over that given period. And then of course, how profitable are those organizations? One thing that happens when we're trying to think about pipeline coverage and trying to increase it from 5x to 7.5x, so an extra 2.5x, is, are we going after the right types of customers? And this is why I really like doing things like cohort analysis, and when you want to look at segments of your customer base, because you can very quickly look at a segment that's going to help you to figure out, if we're looking at these unit economics, which is going to be the segment that we should try to drive more pipeline coverage from. Make sense? If not, rewind and listen to that, listen to it again. Then what we want to look at is our sales capacity. You may say that we successfully have this sales cycle time and length of 4 months with a 20% win rate, and now we're looking at 7x coverage. Now, this could be based on your sales team currently being able to effectively manage 11 live opportunities. If you're saying we need more pipeline and now you're going to lump an extra 5, 6, 7 more opportunities on them, did all of these numbers still act the same? No, then maybe you need more headcount, maybe you need outside resource, maybe you need temporary support, maybe you need tools to help take part of the sales process away so that it can be automated. Effectively, we need to understand our sales capacity and at what point the effectiveness based on their capacity actually starts to break, because then it starts to distort all the other numbers. So I get it, there's a lot to this, but when we start to sanity check our unit economics, we start to look at, okay, so what's the real cost of 2.5x pipeline? More, because it may not just be an extra 2.5x cost of 5x. It could be less. You may find that that next proportion of pipeline that you try to go after is actually cheaper from a CAC perspective, payback perspective. The cost per qualified op could go down. Who knows? You may say the cost of a qualified op is too high if we go and get new customers. So actually, let's go and look at our existing customer base. What can we sell them? Sorry, what extra value can we provide? These are why these things are really important when we're talking about effective pipeline coverage. Whew, that was a lot. Okay, so do I have any more paper? Let's think about some effective coverage ranges. There's a lot of research out there. I'm a big fan of just creating your own benchmarks, but sometimes we're starting from zero and we need to get some ideas as to like, what does effective coverage look like? So I would say for shorter sales cycles, let's say anything from 1 month to 3 months, you should be looking at about 3 to 5x coverage of your pipeline. So as an example, if you have to close $1 million in business, then 3 million to 5 million is going to be a nice window for you to operate in. And just assume that it's not a complicated sale as well. Now for mid-market, I would say anything between 4 to 6x coverage is a reasonable amount. It will also reduce the pressure on you as a leader to think about how much pipeline coverage we need, or reduce the pressure from the board as well, because it might be slightly over, but you want to be safer than you are sorry. And then for enterprise, we're going to need to have a higher amount, high risk, longer deal cycle. So I'd say 5 to 8x is what you're going to need for coverage. So enterprise is kind of looking at the high 5 figures to 6 and 7 figures, because sometimes those deal cycles are over 2 years. So you're trying to understand your effective pipeline coverage over 2 years. It could be a whole presidential change. It could be a whole market shift. It could be, we're not, agentic AI, iRobot comes and we're like, why are we all doing this in the first place? It's not important in the grand scheme of things, all right? So that's how I'd start to think about the effective pipeline coverage. If you don't know where to start, that's a good place to start. Okay, so what do we do next? I would say, make sure you have your numbers right. That's the first thing, right? So first things first is let's just check our numbers. Check and agree on your numbers. We're talking win rate, sales cycle, opportunity definitions, stuff like that are kind of like headline numbers. What's the headline number? We want to talk about slippage. We want to know the quality. So the way that I think about pipeline quality is as a leading indicator rather than lagging, which means a deal just didn't close. And then we're like, was it because it was a bad deal and not a real one? Or was it because of X number of things that it could be? I would look at the start of every month, how much pipeline did we start with? And then after we had our first week maybe of one-to-ones and where we did a deep pipeline review, how many disappeared? I mean, just literally was forced to be qualified out. So if you start with 100 and then you've realized that actually we're now down to 80, that's where we get to that kind of 80% quality rate. So it's a little bit finger in the air, but we need something. We need something that we can try to control in order to improve the number that we're getting. Okay, so let's look at that number, the slippage and the quality. Okay, now that we have these in place, what we want to do is look at different segments. Okay, you can have these all saved on any spreadsheet or any CRM system as filters, and you can just change the report and change the segment. So add some more filtering criteria, your ICP, particular lead scores, regions, revenue brackets, industries, if I haven't said that already. It could be the time of year that they buy. It could be the source that they buy from, and things like product-led growth motion. There's so many different variables that you can use, but create segments that are useful to you. And it's good to do this exercise anyway, right? So now we want to segment, because what we want to do is figure out what does our effective pipeline coverage or headline coverage look like in each of these segments. So coverage, head plus effective. And then we can be in a position to say, so the effective is going to come later, of course. Let's get the headline averages so you can just see, okay, what's going on? And then let's go deeper on the effective, because that is going to be the key thing that's going to help you to understand what's going to be the average effective pipeline coverage, or if we do recognize something's wrong, then we can go down into that segment to get more pipeline, as an example, based on those unit economics that we spoke about. I would really find a way to kind of separate the, doesn't have to be inside a CRM, it becomes a bit complicated, but separate out that pipeline. Again, this is a filter on your CRM or it's a filter on a spreadsheet. We just want to know, like, what's the overall pipeline, what's the big picture, and then what's the segment of pipeline. Sorry, segment's a poor word to use. What's the effective pipeline that we're going to be focusing on based on what we're interested in right now? And what's great is that anything can become effective pipeline coverage at any given time. You can look today at Q3 and Q4 and say, what's our effective pipeline coverage right now? based on what's in there right now. So we know ahead of time that, oh my gosh, we've got summer that's going to get quiet. People are going to come back busy in Q3. It's going to be hard to generate pipeline unless they come back with a new action plan. Then actually everything happens really fast. We need to make sure that we can get the coverage for later stage deals. And guess what that means? It means the conversation that you have is different. So we're going to get our sales reps, maybe we get more junior reps to start searching the market, searching our CRM for old conversations, speaking to existing customers, saying what's happening for 2027, 2028, so that we can get our effective pipeline coverage up now for later on in the year, rather than scrambling around the lastminute.com where it's really stressful. These are why these numbers are so important, and it's important that we track that week by week. And then one thing I would say is separate pipeline out and then just normalize this. Normalize using this language, effective pipe and headline pipe. If you plan and structure the business around effective pipeline and you can do it in a way that's cost effective, this is so powerful. Think about it. You understand how much pipeline that you need in a given window. You know your numbers well enough to figure out when it slips, where we should focus our efforts. Do you know how important that is? So you know the exact segment. You know the exact segment to go to find more of those opportunities. And then what you've got is you've got junior reps or whatever resource you have, marketing, already nurturing old conversations so that when you do go back, you're like, wow, we can pinpoint this segment for Q4, for this kind of thing, and we make sure that we've got more control over our pipeline. A lot of people say pipeline's out of our control, blah, 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 blah. And then we go out to find more pipeline and it's really expensive and it's low quality. And then we end up with this inflated pipeline where we got 9x in just 1 week. We went from 5x to 9x. Really? Who are you selling to? Like someone on road, on the street? That ain't gonna happen. So let's build structure and normalize effective pipeline so that we can make sure that we can increase our chances of hitting our targets. Okay, so if we pull these concepts all together, pipeline is not just about saying, oh, we need 5x. It's often not as simple as that. And even if you are a small organization, try to start with this effective pipe. It's all about timing, what's happening inside a window. It's about your sales cycle. It's about your win rate. It's about how often they slip. It's about the deal quality. All of these things. It's about, is it even a proper opportunity in the first place? And then are your numbers distorted because you're actually just tracking fantasy pipeline? All right. So in this video, I promised to give you a clear understanding of how you can think about healthy pipeline coverage inside your organization. I believe that has been achieved. If not, let me know in the comments and I'll go deeper on any of these topics. Until next time, people, thank you. See you again.